I had always considered myself someone who thrived on solitude, someone who found peace in the quietest corners of the world. But nothing could have prepared me for the weekend I spent alone in that abandoned Colorado cabin. I had stumbled across the listing by accident, an old cabin tucked deep in the mountains, far from any paved road or neighboring house, surrounded by dense pine forests that seemed to swallow the light during the late afternoon hours. The photos looked charming at first glance, a rustic wooden structure with a stone fireplace, creaky floors that hinted at history, and windows that offered panoramic views of snow-capped peaks. But there was something off about it, something the pictures could not capture. The host's description was sparse, almost dismissive, warning only vaguely that the cabin had been vacant for some time, and that it was ideal for those seeking a true escape. I ignored the subtle unease in my stomach and convinced myself that I could handle a quiet weekend away from the world, that a little isolation was exactly what I needed. I packed my car carefully, double-checking supplies, a flashlight, extra batteries, and a fully charged phone. But the moment I turned off the main highway and onto the winding dirt path that led up into the mountains, the cell's signal vanished, leaving me with nothing but a fading GPS and the echo of my own thoughts. The forest closed in on both sides of the road, the trees standing like silent sentinels, and the sun dipped quickly behind the peaks, casting long, dark shadows that seemed to stretch toward my car. By the time I arrived at the cabin, the sky was a deep indigo, the first stars beginning to glimmer in the cold mountain air. The cabin itself looked even older in person, weathered by decades of wind and snow, and the door hung slightly ajar, creaking in the chilly breeze. A shiver ran down my spine, but I forced myself to laugh it off, telling myself that the wind had simply moved the door and that the cabin, though abandoned, was harmless. As I stepped inside, the smell hit me immediately, a musty, damp odor that hinted at long-unused rooms, dust layered thick on every surface, and the faint metallic tang of something I couldn't identify. The fireplace was empty, blackened with ash from a fire long extinguished, and the floorboards groaned beneath my weight, announcing every step I took. I flicked on my flashlight, sweeping the beam across the walls, the furniture draped in yellowed sheets, and the cracked windows that offered glimpses of the dark forest outside. It felt strangely alive in the silence, as if the cabin itself were breathing, and I tried to shake the sensation, blaming it on my imagination. I unpacked quickly, set up a small area to sleep in the main room, and made a small fire in the fireplace, the warmth and light providing a temporary comfort. As the night deepened, I sat in a chair, staring at the flickering flames, and tried to immerse myself in a book I had brought along. That was when I first noticed the noises. The soft, almost imperceptible creaks that didn't come from the floorboards beneath me, faint scratching against the walls, the occasional thump that seemed too deliberate to be the wind. I paused, straining my ears, telling myself it was just an old building settling, the natural sounds of a forest cabin at night. But then came the knock, soft at first, 3 distinct raps against the door, deliberate, slow, echoing through the room. My heart skipped a beat, and I froze listening, my mind racing. I convinced myself that it had to be an animal, perhaps a raccoon or a deer that had managed to knock against the frame of the cabin. Still, instinctively, I reached for my phone to check for messages, but the screen displayed only no signal, and a cold knot of fear formed in my stomach. I tried to call out, "Hello," but my voice sounded absurdly loud, swallowed by the emptiness. The knocks came again, more insistent this time, and I realized that no animal could make such rhythmic, deliberate sounds. The room felt suddenly smaller, the shadows cast by the fire flickering wildly against the walls, and I noticed movement in the corner of my eye, a shape, dark and elongated, standing near the far wall, but whenever I turned toward it, there was nothing there. My pulse quickened, and I forced myself to stay seated, breathing shallow, trying to convince myself it was a trick of the light, a figment of my fear. Minutes passed, then hours, and the cabin seemed to pulse with tension, the darkness outside growing heavier, pressing against the windows. I heard whispers then, almost inaudible, like someone speaking in hushed tones just beyond comprehension, and I swore I could hear footsteps moving across the floor above me, though the cabin had only one story. Panic began to creep in, and I grabbed my flashlight, shining it into every corner of the room, only to see empty spaces and shadowed furniture. I decided to check the rest of the cabin, moving slowly, every creak of the floor sending jolts of fear through my body. As I reached the bedroom at the back, I noticed the window was slightly open, even though I had locked it earlier. A cold wind blew in, carrying with it the faint smell of smoke and something else, something sharp and metallic. I slammed the window shut and bolted it, but the sense of being watched intensified, and the whispers became clearer, like faint words I couldn't quite understand. My rational mind fought to stay calm, but the isolation, the darkness, and the relentless tension gnawed at me. Then I heard it. The door to the cabin creaked open slowly, the hinge squealing, though I had locked it from the inside. My breath caught, and I froze in place, flashlight trembling in my hand, illuminating nothing but the same dusty furniture and the shadows that clung to the corners. Then a shadow moved, sliding across the floor toward me, impossible to identify, yet distinctly human in shape. My instinct screamed at me to run, but every part of me felt paralyzed, trapped by fear. I grabbed a heavy chair, ready to defend myself, but as I swung the door open, nothing was there, only the forest darkness pressing against the cabin's threshold. I realized then that the forest outside seemed different somehow, heavier, darker, as if it had shifted while I had been inside, and a chill ran down my spine. The whispers returned, this time louder, clearer, forming words that I could almost understand but not quite, like a language just beyond comprehension. Desperation overwhelmed me, and I ran to the fireplace, grabbing a log to light the room, the flames flickering wildly, casting enormous shadows on the walls. That's when I heard it again, footsteps behind me, soft but deliberate, pacing the cabin with me. I spun around, but the room was empty, and the chair I had swung earlier lay perfectly still on the floor. My breathing grew ragged, and a cold sweat ran down my back as I realized I had to escape. I tried the door, it wouldn't budge. I pulled, shoved, screamed, but it held firm, as if an unseen force kept it shut. Windows. Locked. No signal on my phone. I was trapped, completely alone with whatever was inside that cabin. Hours passed, or maybe minutes. I couldn't tell, and every sound was magnified. The cracking of floorboards, the rustle of the wind, the whisper of voices just out of reach. I crouched in the corner, flashlight held high, listening to every sound, trying to prepare myself for whatever would happen next. And then I saw it, the shadow in the corner of the room, taller than a man, featureless, but undeniably there, watching me. I didn't move, couldn't move, feeling the weight of its gaze pinning me to the floor. Time became meaningless as I whispered prayers, tried to remain silent, counting my breaths, anything to keep myself calm. And then, as suddenly as it appeared, the shadow receded, retreating into the darkness beyond the firelight, leaving only silence, heavier than before. Dawn broke slowly, the first rays of sun filtering through the dusty windows, and the cabin seemed empty. The oppressive weight lifted slightly, though the floorboards groaned and the creaks persisted. I approached the door cautiously, testing it, and it finally swung open, yielding to my desperate hands. Outside, the forest was quiet, serene almost, but I couldn't shake the feeling that I had been watched the entire night, that something lingered just beyond the tree-line, waiting. I drove down the mountain path without looking back, my eyes fixed straight ahead, heart pounding. Even days later, I can't shake the memory of that night, the whispers, the footsteps, the shadow. I have no rational explanation, no logical answer, only the certainty that I was not alone, and perhaps never truly will be when I think of that cabin tucked deep in the Colorado mountains. I will never go back, and I warn anyone who dares to venture into the abandoned corners of the Rockies. Some places are deserted for a reason, and not all of the occupants are gone.